Just tell me when to start, Susana.
Okay.
Start. All right, so it's so nice to see people here from all over the country, from Oakland, from Venice, California, from Trinidad, from Illinois, from Salt Lake City, the Bronx, New York City, the Upper West Side of New York City, Kentucky. That's really wonderful. So welcome to the West East, that's the WE, we, by, by Coastal Poets of the Pandemic and Beyond Poetry Series. I'm Lynn McGee, and my co-hosts are Susana Case, who like me is in New York City, Carolyne Wright, who is in Seattle, and William Mohr, who is in the Los Angeles area. Our goal with the series is to gather poets and audiences across time zones and from around the country. We have 4 poets reading today that we're very excited to share with you. Claudia Castro Luna from Washington State, John Guzlowski from Chicago, Dayna Patterson, who's also in the Seattle area in Washington State, and Paul Vangelisti from Pasadena, California. It's going to be a great reading. I'm really happy to see so many people here. Please know that everyone in the audience is muted. But please do share your comments in the chat column. You can also view the...
Sorry.
Lynn is muted.
Yeah, sorry, Lynn. That's my
problem.
fault, sorry.
No problem. I think I got muted right after I announced the poet. So let me just go on with this part. Please know that everyone in the audience is muted, sometimes even the speaker. No, only kidding. But please do share your comments in the chat column as you're listening to the reading, and keep an eye on the chat column because we will post in there links where you can buy the poets' books, and we will also screen share the covers of their books when they're being introduced. So that'll be going on. Lastly, I wanted to let you know that this reading will be recorded, as you know, and for privacy, you are welcome to stop your video if you don't want the recording to be included in the recording. Please feel free to stop your video. I'm going to start actually now by introducing our first reader, Dayna Patterson. I'm very excited that Dayna's going to be reading with us tonight. Last summer, I attended a Zoom reading where I heard for the first time Dayna Patterson reading her work. Okay. And I knew when I heard her that night, I was very excited about the reading her work, and I right away ordered her last book. And I'm not a Mormon or a post-Mormon, but the experience of women in traditions that repress them resonates deeply with me, and I think that they will touch anyone who has broken free of a life or some kind of experience that wasn't in their best interest. The lyric clarity of the poems of Dayna Patterson also convey the love of a community she extricated herself from, and it honors the family and the family history that's still rooted there. Carolyne Pearson writes, quote, "Feeling the warm home of Mormonism turned chill and even deadly is experienced by many, but only a poet of the caliber of Dayna Patterson can bring that death to life, illuminate and stand witness to a loss ever present as a, quote, choir that keeps singing after the beautiful organ fails. The quiet triumph of survival is a theme in Patterson's work, as alluded to in her poem, Still Mormon. And this is from the poem, I'm Mormon, the deeply drowned tree, ghosting beneath the boat, is still tree. Please welcome Dayna Patterson.
I think that's one of the most beautiful introductions I've ever received. Thank you so much, Lynn, and thank you, Susana and Bill and Carolyne for inviting me to read as part of this series. I'm really grateful to be here. And thank you everyone for coming to listen to poetry on your Sunday afternoon when you could be doing so many other things. I'm going to share 3 poems today. I'm going to read the title poem to the book that Lynn was just speaking about. And then I'm going to try something new. I'm going to try to share a video poem. I figure since we're all on screens, maybe I'll try to share something that was made for a screen. So we'll see how that goes. And then I'm going to read a newer piece that is part of a new manuscript that I've been working on. So to start, the title poem for If Mother Braids a Waterfall. If mother braids a waterfall in a country where no one speaks her language, if she's a shrine few bow to, few supplicate, if she's a book no one reads, verses rich as incantation, if mother weaves a forest floor from tree roots in a swath of clear cut, if she untangles rivers into tributary threads, the beds long since dry, if she's a gold rush with no prospectors, a queen bee with no drones, honeycomb without attendants, if in the morning mother conducts a chorus of larks, if at night a throng of nightingales, if her children sleep through the song, if she holds a rope through an oubliette's trapdoor, calls down to us, but we focus on the guard, pushing grub through the bean slot once a day. His thrilling fingertips, his footstep echoing as he walks away. If we look up at last, if we relearn mother tongue through hard listening, if she's the one and only, not one of many, a clairvoix of Egyptian glass in the stucco's arabesque, a gold seam for our brokenness, our shards, an arroyo parched for the rain of our praise. If she's starscape, all dark and blaze and hungry for our eyes. So as Lynn mentioned, this is a book that I wrote examining the conversion of my ancestors to the Mormon faith, as well as interrogating my beliefs and poeming my way through my deconversion of Mormonism. And something that has become attractive to me as I separated myself from a very patriarchal religion is the idea of a feminine divine. And so you hear some of that in this poem, that if we have this feminine divine that we can turn to. In Mormon theology, there's the idea that there's God the Father, God the Son, Jesus Christ, the Holy Ghost, also male. But then there's this elusive figure called God the Mother, but Mormons are not allowed to pray to her. There's not a lot that's known about her. She's kind of taboo and off limits, which is maybe one of the reasons why I find the idea of the feminine divine so attractive and so interesting as I'm trying to find my way back into some kind of spirituality. So now I'm going to try to do something that I haven't done before, which is share a video poem. My daughters and I, early pandemic, made a stop motion video poem. And it is, I'm gonna share my screen, so if you'll just bear with me for a minute here. And it disappeared. Are you seeing this tab? Hopefully. Sorry, it looks like it did go away. Okay. Are you able to hear it? Thumbs up? Yeah, okay. So that's the first and only stop motion I've ever made and will probably ever make because it's so much work, but I'm delighted that we saw it through and finished it. I realized I forgot to show you, I meant to show you after I read the first poem, one of the things that's been kind of keeping me sane is experimenting with embroidering on paper. So this is the title poem that I read first, and a kind of a waterfall structure that I embroidered on the side. And it's mostly thread with one broken guitar string in there as well. And this is on my website if you want to have a closer look. The last piece I'm going to read is in the voice of God the Mother, and it's part of a new manuscript that I'm working on. And this is called God the Mother Speaks with a Mouth of Ocean. There's an epigraph by Charles Wright. How far can you go if you concentrate? How far down? Shh, be still. Listen to my saline pulse. You are such I-minded children. Listen. When sailors stumble on my sublime, they are as likely to cry Leviathan as mermaid, then carve me into the bows of their ships. They think to seal my waters' salt-kissed lips. I tentacle cradle their bones. If you desire an image, dream Chromis viridis, damselfish in a blue-green dress. Dream arowana, bony tongue, my eminence grease, moving the deeps, harboring silence. Pass me quilled plume of sea pen, and I'll sketch my likeness in shades of mantis shrimp and harlequin bass. You've puzzled over how to imagine my skin. Here, I reveal a mystery of chromatophore and papillae. I shift to pattern of passing cloud, polyp my body to resemble reefs of Gorgonian coral, Venus fan, and cherry blossom, and purple sea whip. In my hadal palace, where daylight dares not seep, close your eyes. Here, you must kindle your own hidden fires, bright pulsing, like my comb jellies and jewel squids and brittle stars. Water babies, enwombed in dark, you must learn to switch on your body's buried glow, its secret brilliance. Then listen, harder. Hear my song in the current carried hum, the beat of sea angels' wings, the siphoning jet of a vampire squid, its black cloak open like a mouth to catch whatever is able to reach my midnight abyss, this asylum, hushaby of marine snow. Thank you so much.
Bill, are you there?
I'm trying.
Okay.
Finally got it unmuted. Thank you. I have been reading Paul Vangelisti's poems for almost a half century now. And almost from the start, I realized that he was the poet on the West Coast who best put into practice the international poetics I found in Michael Hamburger's and quintessential book, The Truth of Poetry. If Hamburger was the first post-World War II critic to implicitly remonstrate mainstream American poetry for its provincial insularity, then Paul Vangelisti is the poet, editor, publisher, translator in the past half century, whose status as a member of the avant-garde is always willing to undergo a rigorous self-interrogation. If exile from the city of his birth has found its improvised way station in Los Angeles, he has put that contingency to good use. Today, he will read from a book that takes its cue from that famous Los Angeles genre, the noir. Motive and opportunity summons the disenchanted but bemused buoyancy of the detective novel and turns it into a meditation on the search for the methods we might use to establish the means, if not the meaning, by which we sustain ourselves. I give you Paul Vangelisti.
Am I unmuted? Okay, you're muted, so I can't hear. Yeah, all right. I'm unmuted, correct? You can hear me, okay. So this book called Motive and Opportunity, if any of you read crime novels or read the newspaper about crime, one of the two of the three famous ingredients, means, motive, and opportunity. So Bill says we have the means, and perhaps we're going to check today and see if we actually have the motive and opportunity. There's some 21 poems in this sequence. It's the final sequence in the book. I'm going to read 12 of those today, and they're short poems, and they each have a title. So the first one is called Scene of the Crime. Hallway lights likely burned out, and the faintest whiff of ocean coming this way. You stop in a doorway, cheek on cold plaster, and wait. You sense the story has no ending. The heart shadows whom it will, turning right or left in the gloom. And what's probably about to happen, is it part of the intrigue or just the kind of coincidence you've learned to distrust? There, something dragging and a warmish sensation before that tang of salt air. Saturday morning. You try the doorknob again, a few minutes after 6, the first Saturday in March. You force yourself to breathe, nudging open the door. How easily will you find it? You step into the wide kitchen, off the porch, light unfolding over treetops along the hill. You begin to feel almost at home, like turning on the radio, putting on coffee, and going back out to fetch the paper from the driveway. Who knows? Shifting your eyes to the empty sink, row of cupboards, glint of glass door next to the fridge. You're breathing a little easier now, almost certain that you're alone. Jeopardy. The crime always feels like yours. That you'll gamble happiness, your own and everyone else's, just to understand, to uncover some mysterious combination of thoughts, images, commonplaces, adding up, you hope, to nothing less than a confession. As for motive, one might as well question the point of dereliction or evil itself. Late. Did you say you've been here before and that somehow eases the shock, the tawdriness of what you discover, nudging open the door with your elbow, following the traces of blood out back into the well-kept yard of roses, avocado, and lemon trees? Does it get easier, maybe familiar, that final gesture, the position of the hands in relation to the rest of the body? And that question you hardly ever bring up or almost never consider pursuing. As you step around the rickety gate at the side of the house, you wonder what you expect to find, how late it is, how bad the traffic on your way downtown. Evidence. Now you're right in the middle. Sleepless nights, a summer cold coming on and little to show for it. A double homicide downtown at rush hour with a handful of witnesses who didn't see a thing. No murder weapon, of course, and those first on the scene didn't do a very good job except at pointing fingers. Can't even think of starting over with a little more than a jumble of rumors and contradictions. It's a wonder you keep at it, vaguer by the day, and a crime that seems like everything else just to fade away. No past, no present, but a glum, sprawling future that has all of us pretending. Innocence. Stale summer seeping through the blinds. On the table, tumblers of melted ice, a pack of Chesterfields, and you trying not to yawn. Does she keep that vague smile when you hear steps on the stairs and pretend to reach for your cigarettes to see behind her? Before the knob begins to turn and the door flies silently open, aren't you now playing it over? Delicate fingers, your silly, almost innocent grin, your weight shifting from the chair, reaching for your ankle and the cold steel that's your only salvation. Why can't you remember what she's about to say, if anything at all? A picture. Of course, it's always been a town where no one asks questions. And you were here first, even if those times don't mean so much now. The contradictions keep piling up. The days get longer and hotter. So who was it coming up the stairs? Who left traces of pale lipstick, a hint of lavender on the pillowcase? How much does her picture really mean? What can you read in a look or events that harmonize, appear, and disappear? Who still believes in accidents when everyone has the same alibi and denies the reason they're even here? Clouds. They hang heavy to the northeast, unmoving in the sultry light. You pull into a gas station, fill up and buy a Coke. Cold plastic in your hand, you think of all the times you've stopped to think like this. A sinking sun, night air static with neon and brash impossibility. You pull out south on Glendale, too early to call in, nothing on your phone, too many coffees to give it even a second thought. Traffic's light enough. As you poke at the screen and learn the chances of evening showers downgraded again. Long streets. The latest break in the case didn't pan out. Sketchy evidence and a last-minute alibi, fed-up wife of a to-remain nameless politician Ruled out your suspect, another city hall hotshot, it would have been oh so sweet to nail. Leave nothing to chance. Go through the notes one more time. Leave nothing out of the whole wacky scenario. The players are all there, plenty of opportunity. Maybe skip dinner, buy a sandwich and a beer, and drive up to the observatory. Looking southwest across the city, mapping left to right the 3 longest streets in the world, Figueroa, Vermont, Western, ending hazy out there in the evening sun. Maybe something will come to you as you eat your sandwich, take a sip of beer, considering how much of your life in this lost city begins to make any sense. Portrait. Mug's game, old Rosen used to grumble, flicking ash into his coffee cup. Most likely true, seen from far enough away, though it brings little satisfaction to scenes like this. When you first walk in, they're all around the grandmother's body that looks about to say something from the corner of a long sofa. Your turn to write it up, says the captain. Take your time. Don't need it back until the day after tomorrow. A shot through the heart from the smaller sofa where he'd probably sat hundreds of times chatting with his guardian angel who loved him most in the world. Then to the library, the grandfather's off the rear garden. He'd taken his bourbon and soda and sat in front of the old man's portrait, held a mouthful and pistol between his teeth and fired, top of his head all over the painting. How much of what you're going to try? Mother gone for over 20 years, leaving him and his sister in that big house, eventually turns up in Paris, writing, though apparently mostly in French. The report's basically preliminary, but how to begin? In a fit of blind rage? Sure, it will take time to tie up the loose ends, and someone like you who reads enough French. Number. In this business, there's always another day and another. The case winding down, tomorrow's a lazy afternoon of reading or napping or a long walk along the river. A life like any other, an Irish friend liked to say, expert in afternoons. Once in a great while, time slows to a crawl, like summers in high school. No clue who you are, only the awful sense that it might ever be this way. Think it through, get it all down and cross out much of what you've written. Over the years, you've learned to listen, but it helps only so much. Nothing's changed. The stakes remain pitifully small, remote by any reckoning. You get up to have some water, a cup of coffee, wondering where you managed to put the woman's number. Why wasn't it there in your notebook last night? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I think our next poet, Claudia, is going to introduce the next poet. Are you there, Claudia?
Claudia is there and I'm here. I'm going to introduce Claudia. Unless Claudia
All right.
wishes
I mean,
to introduce
hi,
me,
hi,
but
Claudia.
yeah.
All right.
Hi. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you very much for attending. It's still afternoon here in Seattle, where Claudia and I both are, though we have not seen each other face to face for several months because of the pandemic. But I've had the pleasure of knowing Claudia now for the last several years, first when she was Seattle's first civic poet from 2015 until 2017. And then she moved immediately from there to becoming the Washington State Poet Laureate from 2018 to 2021. Usually it's a 2-year term, but she was given a 3rd year, kind of like Joy Harjo for the National Poet Laureateship, because Claudia was doing such a wonderful job. She is the recipient of a number of awards, Academy of American Poets Prize, and an Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellowship, which is an amazing, it's a goodly sum of money to work on a project as part of the laureateship. She's also had fellowships at Hedgebrook and Vona. She's received a King County for Culture grant and a Jack Straw Cultural Center Fellowship. She was born in El Salvador, came to the United States during the Civil War in El Salvador, which unfortunately was supported by our government, not the liberal side. And she came and has been living here ever since, but she lives and writes in both English and Spanish. She's the author of Killing Marias from Two Sylvias Press, which is the book cover on the screen right now. It was a finalist for the Washington State Book Award in 2018. Another book called This City from Floating Bridge Press. And most recently, a wonderful accordion book called One River, 1,000 Voices from Chin Music Press, 2019, which celebrates the Columbia River's energy, beauty, and power, and honors the resilience of Native peoples who for millennia have lived along its banks and at the historical juncture of water and climate change. And her work has appeared in several anthologies, including This is the Place and Vanishing Points, contemporary Salvadoran narrative. And I've been really honored to work with her, read with her at several events in the past. And she has done some wonderful work at Seattle's Community Literary Center, Richard Hugo House, holding classes and having people write in Spanish as well as in English, which is wonderful because we have a lot of people in this country, in this area who, whose first language is Spanish. And it's really wonderful for them to have the opportunity to write in their native language. So let's welcome Claudia Castro Luna to read. So welcome, Claudia, and you'll have to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Carolyne, for that lovely introduction. Thank you very much. And thank you also to Lynn and Susan for putting this amazing reading together. I think it's wonderful that Zoom has afforded us this chance to be connected in this way, because we otherwise it would be we'd be pressed to make it happen. And thank you to John and Paul and Dayna for your readings. I looked forward to John's reading. My first ever job as a teacher was in Pasadena, so I know about going up to the observatory and looking at the city spread out, Los Angeles. That was wonderful, Paul, thank you. I thought I would start with a poem in a book that came out as an anthology during COVID, and it's called Alone Together, Love, Grief, and Comfort in the Time of COVID-19 is this book. And I'll read the contribution. And by the way, the sales from this anthology go to support independent booksellers who've struggled as other businesses have during this time. So this is titled Her Way, And I dedicated it to Pramila Jayapal, who is our congressional representative here in the area where Carolyne and myself live, which is the greater Seattle area. So this is her way. It matters how we walk the world. To see with heart matters. To acknowledge grief, to see in others the same sparkle so familiar in our own mother's eye. To learn the old names, to say them with dignity, that is important. Courage is not a crown, more like chattering of teeth, the knot in the stomach at choosing the long, hard way, owning what is not known. That takes courage. And knowing that hunger can be for bread as for justice. Having a glimpse of home is part of it. Not homes had, but the ones to build, where there will be room for everyone at the table. And for those who only want a cool glass of lemonade, there will be a porch on the sunny side of the street under the knowing eye of a wise nearby tree. Thank you. So that is from Alone Together. And then I am excited that in a few days, I have shaped this reading around the news that on Wednesday or very soon thereafter, we will rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. And I am just really happy that that is happening. And so my reading sort of revolves around the necessity for that to happen and just my writing into that. So I'm reading from One River, a Thousand Voices, the book that Carolyne made reference to. This is an accordion book. So it's a one poem, but it's a super long book shaped as an accordion. And the writing of it came as a result of the fellowship that I received from the Academy of American Poets. The Columbia River starts in Canada. And I think about a third of its trajectory is in Canada, but then enters Washington State and cuts it right through it. It's the fourth largest river in the continental US. It is an incredible sight to behold, no matter where you're standing along the river. So as it traverses the territory of Washington State, I mean, if you look at Washington State, it cuts it straight down the middle. And then at the point where the Snake River coming from Idaho joins it, it becomes an enormous body of water that is also the natural border between Oregon and Washington State. And the two rivers then become one and they make their trajectory to the ocean. And that is the journey that Lewis and Clark were trying to make and eventually found. And it is a majestic sight to behold. The Columbia River Gorge is what that trajectory is called. So this is a very long poem that examines this idea that humans we position ourselves at the center of things, but that has been our hubris and our biggest mistake. And I believe that it's about time we start thinking of other living beings as equal partners in this planet that we inhabit. So the poem eventually makes the argument that the river itself is its own being. It has its own spirit and its own logic and its own ways that exist outside of our human consciousness, but that they are there. And so I'm reading only an excerpt as it is long, and I'm skipping around, I have to say. So this is from One River, a Thousand Voices. And I'll just say this, that the title of the book came as I was traveling along the Columbia River and one day realized that, wait a second, the Columbia River has had many names. Columbia is the name that was given by the captain who found the mouth of the river. It took explorers a long time to find the mouth of the river as it comes into the ocean. And the captain was on the Columbia. That was the name of the ship, hence the name of the river. But it's had, of course, many names throughout the millennia. And I thought, hold on, birds must have their own name for the river. And what about What about the coyotes? What about the fish who live in its waters? They must also call it their own name. And so that's where the title of the book comes from. So One River, a Thousand Voices. Before prayers of praise and gratitude, before songs of sorrow and joy, before words spoken and unspoken rained upon your current, when cadence and rhythm of dancing feet transmitted heart and spleen, yearning and gratitude down to your silty floor, certainly thousands of years before captains jostled and repeatedly sailed past your ocean frontier, then sank along your bars. Before a man called you Columbia, you had long been Nichiwana. For millennia, running unbounded, hoiling, coiled within your current, arias of summer suns and howls of countless wolf moons. Most certainly, before your chilly current was with concrete penned and silenced, so that your icy pulse degenerated to tepid lakes, before plentiful salmon runs came to live their splendor only in the memory of those who were to them witness and their descendants, when man and woman were such, not Indian man and not Indian woman, a time before treaty and broken treaty had entered the lexicon of Cilician, Sahaptin, and Chinookan languages, before men who had lived by their own rules were forced from their lands, before all the befores, you, river, had already been called 1,001 names, each name for every animal, creature, and vegetable spirit that ever breathed, mated, and died, that ever flowered or shed a spore, each tree, each flower, each bulb, fish, mammal, insect, bird, each calling you a name of her own, from large to small, from scaly to winged, from furred to feathered, each thing indebted to your grace, scree, huckleberry, sage, pine, camas, alder, poplar, maple, lupin, deer, bear, coyote, elk, quail, grouse, hawk, eagle, bat, fox, wren, warbler, butterfly, burbot, salmon, lamprey, sturgeon, sculpin, each diurnal and nocturnal creature, her features embodying her own melodious name for life, the owl who swoops to snatch in night's downy hush, the unsuspecting frog, drought whose rainbow swagger flares gainfully your waters. As we call out to them, they call out to you, woodpecker tribes, beaver bands, coneflower clumps, each living thing with her own ardent name, on the hoof, on the scale, on the feather, on the fur, on the leaf, on the mud, on the beak, on the bark. One river, 1,000 names, 1,000 voices chanting river songs, singing songs of place, charting songs of belonging. So I'll stop here, even though the poem continues. I have to say that the book was published by Chin Music Press, and Chin Music Press agreed to donate a portion of the sales of the book to the largest nonprofit working on the Columbia River. I don't know if you're aware, but the warming temperatures of the river's water is making it ever harder for salmon to be able to come back. And because they come back into sweet water every year to river water, and we are losing salmon. And so the purchase of this book through Chin Music Press contributes to Columbia River keepers in doing their work. All right, so I would like to read a few short poems from a new manuscript I'm working on. Again, this is considering this wonderful news that we will be part of the world again and again as a nation will take on this very concerning issue of climate change. So Carolyne said in her introduction that I am from El Salvador, and I was born there and grew up there until my family left when I was 14 years old, right when the Civil War there started. So this poem is titled Bruja, which means witch, and is situated back in El Salvador. Back then, my classmates called me Chiqui, short for Chiquita, by teacher's orders, the one at the front of the line. Chiqui, like a carrot seed, like an orange pip, like an acorn, like possibility. The word seed may be traced to the Gothic manaseths, mankind, the world. Chiqui may be traced to the 4th grade at Escuela Urbana Mixta Madre del Salvador. Behind the school was a mountain, plush green, birthing waterfalls. Cihuatehuacan, it was called. Cihuatl, from the Nahuatl, woman, Huacan, a place name. Some say Cihuatehuacan translates to city of sorceresses. I say Cihuatl, earth, makes seeds whence things of the world come. And in the same vein, thinking of seeds, this poem, which I will read first in Spanish and then in English. Milpa. Milpa tierna, bajo mirada aguda de volcanes azules, tallo fuerte, flor de seda, granos de vida y semilla tenaz que encontró campo fértil dentro de mí. Milpa. Tender green milpas under blue volcanoes, silken maize tassels, kernels of life, and the hardy seed that found fertile soil in me. Milpa is the name that we give to corn. Corn growing in a field is called milpa. And this last poem is just was published, part of this manuscript, but was published by the Texas Poetry Review. It's titled Ask the Bees. I've been living in the United States for almost 40 years. So I finished high school here. I went to college and graduate school. I've worked my adult life in the States, and have only been back to El Salvador 4 times in all that span of time. And not because I don't want to go, but because the memories of the war are, it's very hard to separate myself from the memories of the war. There's a lot of trauma around that. But the last, I have been twice in the last 5 years, partly because my father was very ill. So I made an emergency trip to visit him. So this poem is making reference to one of those times when I was recently back there. It's titled Ask the Bees. On my last trip to El Salvador, spiraling down a remote mountain highway, I spotted a woman and her child sitting on the side of the road. A sun-bleached umbrella cast shade on her, and on a table stacked with unlabeled glass vessels filled with honey. Behind her, a steep gorge, ravishing emerald wound, hummed a tune that told of the beginning of things. The honey came from there, she said, pointing at the jungle below. Mystery of forest, mystery of honey, necessity of survival, this mother making a living from the industriousness of hirsute insect fairies, harvesting nectar and iridescent powder from wildflowers, making beauty edible. The honey emanated a neon glow, bright and potent, as if alive. The pulsating force of the gorge, the song of the torobos, the roar of the jaguar, the gloss of the leaves, the soil, volcanic ash hung suspended inside each container. For us to remember this brilliant day, I said to Papa, handing him a jar. This day when we stood arm in arm and talked about the war, what it took from all of us. A day when I asked him to name every tree, every flower we came across, and he did. He named them all. A gesture that said, we are from here, from this forsaken place where we know the names of things. On my return at Dallas airport, a customs officer confiscated my jar. Later, in a cafe waiting for my flight to Seattle, I felt cheeks wet, my tears like a meandering rivulet through the lush terrain that sustained the bees, that made the honey, that helped the woman help herself. In the airport's sterile setting, I considered the honey of things. How much time would have to pass before I'd walk next to my papa once more? How is it that we overlook what is important, value the wrong things? What would they say about the meaning of grief if I asked them, the bees who turn sun's fire into edible gem? Magicians and scientists at once, they have for millennia healed us, nourished us, pollinated this blue sphere we call home. Those ancient alchemists hunting for the truth and power to transmute base metals into gold searched in vain. Bees have known the secret all along, transforming with exquisite care, which is also love, yellow dust into liquid gold. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Claudia.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
for inviting me and having me here. And thank you all for joining the reading. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
So our last reader today is John Guzlowski, and I was introduced to his poetry by Jennifer Franklin, who's in the Zoom room today. And she had recommended to me some of his early books, this one, Lightning and Ashes, and this one, Echoes of Tattered Tongues, in which he writes about his family's experience in the concentration camps and life as a refugee. I recently discovered that he writes about other aspects of his life as well in this newer book, True Confessions. And I'm just going to read a very short forward from True Confessions, which is titled What I Write About. I write about snow and sparrows, the world in the morning, the world at night, the friends who are still here and wondering where I've gone to, and the friends who are waiting in their graves for my memories to give them some breath. I write about God and aging, my wife and my family, the way a door closes and the way a door waits to be opened. I write a little about my mom and dad, the lives they had after they left the concentration camps. I write about standing at a bus stop in Chicago in the pearly gray rain, waiting for a passing crucifixion, just the way I did when I was a kid 50 years ago. In other words, anything is potential topic for John Guzlowski.
Hello, thanks for inviting me to this reading. I've really enjoyed listening to the poetry. Hi, and I'm going to read some poems from my last two books, the Echoes book and the True Confessions book. I'm going to start with the Echoes book. It's a poem called, It's a poem called My Mother Was 19, and it's about the day the Germans came to her home in southeastern Poland. My mother was 19. Soldiers from nowhere came to my mother's farm, killed her sister's baby with their heels, shot my grandma too. One time in the neck, then for kicks in the face lots of times. They saw my mother, they didn't care she was a virgin, dressed in a blue dress with tiny white flowers. They raped her so she couldn't stand up, couldn't lie down, couldn't talk. They broke her teeth when they shoved her dress into her mouth. If they had had a camera, they would have taken her picture and sent it to her. That's the kind of men they were. Here's what my mother said about all of this years later. She said, "Let me tell you, God doesn't give you any favors. He doesn't say, now you've seen this bad thing, but tomorrow you'll see this good thing, and when you see it, you'll be smiling. That's bullshit." The second poem I'd like to read is What the War Taught Her. My mother learned that sex is bad. Men are worthless. It is always cold, and there is never enough to eat. She learned that if you are stupid with your hands, you will not survive the winter, even if you survive the fall. She learned that only the young survive the camps. The old people are left in piles like worthless paper, and babies are scarce like chickens and bread. She learned that the world is a broken place where no birds sing, and even angels cannot bear the sorrows God gives them. She learned that you don't pray your enemies will not torment you, you only pray that they will not kill you. I'd like to read a poem about my dad. My dad was taken to Buchenwald concentration camp in 1941, and he spent the next 4 years there. When he was finally liberated by the Americans, he weighed 70 pounds. And I used to ask him how he was able to survive with the little bit of food that he had. And this is what he told me. It's a poem called What My Father Ate. My father ate what he couldn't eat, what his mother taught him not to. Brown grass, small chips of wood, the dirt beneath his gray dark fingernails. He ate the leaves off trees. He ate bark. He ate the flies that tormented the mules working in the fields. He ate what would kill a man in the normal course of his life. Leather buttons, cloth caps, anything small enough to get into his mouth. My father ate roots. He ate newspapers. In his slow, clumsy hunger, he did what the birds did, picked for oats or corn or any kind of seed left in the dry shit by the cows. And when there was nothing to eat, he'd search the ground for pebbles, and they would loosen his saliva, and he would swallow that. And all the other men did the same. My parents met at the very end of the war, just weeks before the war ended. My father was on a death march. The Germans had taken a lot of the people in Buchenwald, a lot of the prisoners, and just sent them out walking, hoping that they would die on their walk. My father was on this death march when he met my mother, who was in another sub-camp of Buchenwald concentration camp. And this poem is in his voice. Here, let me get it. It's called My Father Tells Me How He Met My Mother. We came upon a small slave camp in the woods. 3 or 4 buildings, a fence of barbed wire, a closed gate. Some of us were dying and fell to our knees right there. Others kept walking and stumbling toward that gate. There was no one around, no German guards, no soldiers. They must have run away because they thought the war was finished and the Americans were near. There were no prisoners either that we could see on the barracks beyond the fence. We thought that maybe the ones who had been there had been taken like us on a death march. It was so quiet. One of the men, a Frenchman, stepped up to the gate and shouted hello. That's all he said. He said it in German first and then French, but no one answered. It sounded funny in French. Bonjour, bonjour. An army truck stood in front of one of the barracks buildings, and I thought I saw some movement there. Even though I only had one good eye, I could see it. Someone moving near the back of the truck. I pointed this out to the Frenchman, and he saw it too. And we both shouted then, him in French and me in Polish. I shouted, Dzień dobry, dzień dobry. I felt foolish saying that, good day. There had not been a good day for a long time. A woman then came out of one of the barracks. Like us, she was dressed in rags, striped rags. She stumbled to the gate and stopped there. She looked at us and we looked at her. No one said anything for a while. I could see she was weak. She held the gate so tightly with her hands so she wouldn't fall. I couldn't speak. I had not seen a woman for months and had not talked to one for years. The Germans would kill you for talking to a woman. Then she spoke in Polish, slowly. She said, "What now?" I didn't know what to say. My tongue was like a rock in my mouth. She said it again, "What now?" And I still didn't know what to say, or what would happen, or if the world would end that day or not. I was hungry and spent, and I didn't know anything. I looked at her and felt so weak, felt like I was going to fall and join my brothers dying behind me. And your mother pulled the gate open and said, "Please come in." And I did. I'm going to read some poems from my my new book, True Confessions, and it's a book about my life from about 1965 to the present. It begins with a poem about the refugee camp I was born in, and about the first time I saw snow. And I want to start with that. It's called Refugee Camp, 1951. I stood in the white swirling snow and stretched out both my hands to catch the falling flakes. And I saw a purple light coming all at once from nowhere and everywhere. There was beauty in it and magic too. I was a kid and couldn't have thought that, but that was the way it felt. It felt like the whole world was waiting on my pleasure, like God himself was staring down from heaven, elbows spread across a giant windowsill. He was smiling at me playing in the snow, and maybe it was God's smile that showered a purple light across the dark, snow-crusted world. The book is, the book of poems is done chronologically, and I had a very hard time in the 60s. I was drinking too much and doing too many drugs. And this is a poem called Talking Drunk to a Drunk Woman I Don't Know. The party's in another room, but the hallway is safe for silence. And she tells me there is something in winters that keeps them coming back again and again. And I laugh because I think she said sinners. So again, I ask where she comes from. And she tells me there are moons that never see sunlight, books that never see rain. And I try to shake my head clear, but it doesn't help because she starts again, telling me about the windows in the attic, the basement in her dreams, the cost of friction when friction means dreaming. I try to stand up to go to the bathroom, but she pulls me down into a puddle of bones, and finally I know her words make sense. I spent a long time teaching, and I want to read a poem about my students and their essays. It's called My Students and Their Essays. They come to me with papers on Down syndrome, euthanasia, grandfathers dying of liver cancer, the stresses that break young people down and turn them into suicides, zombies, and alcoholics with no way out but more booze and more pain. And I smooth the pages, pat them into neat piles and say, here you need a comma, there a hyphen, and don't forget to cite your sources and correctly alphabetize the work cited. But this isn't what I want to say. I want to tell them the lies I want to tell myself. Don't worry. Things will get better. Life turns the corner. Diligence and discipline will save us from death. Just a couple more poems. I want to read a poem about my wife. My life changed around when I met my wife, and this is a poem called "At 40, My Wife Linda Begins Writing Poems." Each night, they come to her in dreams, and when she can't listen anymore, she wakes and writes in darkness. The shadows from the street falling through the blinds and onto the paper like whispers. She feels me there beside her, sleeping in a world without dreams or horizons, just a beached whale, all breath and cold flesh. When she reads her poems to me in the morning kitchen, I'm puzzled, frightened. Don't worry, she says. I love you more than anything. She dreams one night she is driving in the desert, wind moving through the air like lean snakes. Hungry, she stops near a gray shed, sees the bones of 3 angels lying on a table, and urinates into a tub filled with photos. In the corner, her mother stands in red stockings, her feet swollen like salmon, her tongue adrift in a dark sea, her lips shaping sighs, maybe questions, each one as different as blue and yellow. When Linda wakes, the lines are scrimshaw, circles flattening under the weight of triangles, gashes, red birds, and trees. I put down my coffee cup, and search her eyes. She knows what it all means. I'm going to read just one more poem. It's a poem about my mother. And it's a poem about my mother. It's called Dear Mom. It's a prose poem. I dreamt I was with you again last night. It was in the old house in Chicago, the first one I remember the number for. You planted flowers where there had never been flowers, watered them with the water that fell from the sky. You washed my hair with that water too. You said it would keep me young and help me grow. Autumn came and the rain fell harder and there was snow, and you put it in a dishpan and melted it and washed my hair with it. You said the water from snow was as pure as the water from rain. Years later, in your last house in Arizona, the one I still remember the number for, I washed your hair with water from the sink. There was no rain in the desert, no snow either. You told me stories you never told me before about your sister and the time she visited Lvov, the candy she found on the seat of the train, about your pet pig Carolyne and how much you loved sitting with her in the forest and watching the leaves fall in the coolness that followed summer. I listened, and when you asked me where the water came from, I told you I had collected it from the clouds. Thank you very much.